Hey there, welcome to Blockhead, the Peanuts tribute podcast from a cartoonist's point of view. My name is Jeff Grogan, and I will be your host for the next few minutes to talk about Peanuts, Charles Schulz, and all things Charlie Brown, Linus, Lucy, and Snoopy too. So sit back and enjoy. Hello again, Blockhead listeners. Welcome to a new edition of the podcast. Today we have the conclusion of our two-part interview with the wonderful Ron Ferdinand, the Sunday Dennis the Menace cartoonist, the man who makes it happen on Sundays. And I hope you listened to the first part, and if you enjoyed that, you're going to enjoy this just as much. Ron is just such a wonderful guest, and we had such a lovely chat. And boy, has he got stories to tell, and he's so forthcoming, and there's just so much to talk about when it comes to a comic strip that is as venerable and iconic as Dennis the Menace is. I've been really lucky these last couple of weeks. I've had some wonderful conversations with cartoonists, and in particular, Marcus and Ron come to mind, and this little mini celebration of Dennis the Menace is it's kind of nice. It's made me go back and look at some of my collection of stuff. I have a bunch of Pocket Full of Fun books that I picked up a couple of years ago. I had a bunch of them when I was a kid, but you know what happens to those. Anyway, it's amazing what you could get for 50 cents, these digest-sized books back then. Now they cost like, $10 if you're going to get one on eBay or something, maybe even more now. Anyway, they're terrific. They're like jam-packed with like a couple 100 pages worth of comics. And the comics are, of course, are from the comic books, so they're Al Wiseman, Fred Toole, Owen Fitzgerald, and whoever else worked on those books. Boy, I think there was a bunch of other people, names that I'm not familiar with, but I'm sure somebody can clue me into. Anyway, it's kind of fun in the Sunday funny versions of the Pocket Full of Fun, the ones that collect the Sunday comics, to see if you can find a Hank Ketchum Sunday mixed in there once in a while. Marcus clued me in that Hank would notch one of the panels, or at least he would notch his panel borders on the daily cartoons so that you'd know it was a Hank Ketchum original as opposed to one of the assistants. And I wonder if the same is true for the Sundays. Are there any Sundays? And I think I came across one here that has a notch in it, so I'm pretty sure it's a Hank Ketchum. I should have asked Ron about that, but I never did. But anyway, as a matter of fact, Hank talks about the Sundays a little bit in an interview that Ron clued me in on YouTube. Hank Ketchum and Bill Moyers. Hank Ketchum and Larry King. Bill Moyers, no. Hank Ketchum and Larry King. In that interview, Hank talks about the Sundays and talks about how the assistants usually do those. That's why they're a different animal, is the phrase. In fact, a caller called in and spoke about that a little bit. It was interesting to hear that exchange. But anyway, I guess Hank, if he did do Sundays, they were pretty early in the series. So I'm looking over these Pocket Full of Funs, and I'm noticing in the ones that I have, which are collections of the comics from the 50s and 60s mostly, Dennis's head is a little different. His head's a little rounder in those early years than it gets later on. Yeah, his head is definitely rounder. Just like, Charlie Brown's head gets rounder as time goes on, and Dennis's becomes a little less round. I don't know what that means. You can think about that. Maybe there's something to be said for that. I don't know. I've also got these paper cuts collections of the comic books, of the Dennis the Menace comic books by Al Wiseman and Fred Toole and Owen Fitzgerald and Fred Toole. There are 3 volumes of these right now. Maybe there's a 4th one in the offing, and all 3 of them are wonderful. There is Dennis the Menace, the cult classic comic books by Al Wiseman and Fred Toole. That's volume 1. Volume 2 is, again, the cult classic comic books, this time by Owen Fitzgerald and Fred Toole, with an intro, kind of interesting, by Gilbert Hernandez, another one of my absolute favorite cartoonists. Maybe one day we'll have a chance to talk to him. And maybe about Dennis, and maybe about some of his kid comics. That would be kind of cool. And then, of course, the 3rd book is Dennis the Menace in Hawaii. the cult classic comic book by Al Wiseman and Fred Toole, which includes a never-seen-before Hank Ketchum interview. So if you are at all interested in Dennis the Menace, there are a couple of things to look for. The chronological collections of Dennis the Menace by Fantagraphics, there's, 4 or 5, maybe 6 volumes of that out before they stopped doing that for whatever reason. And then you can pick up these books from Paper Cuts, which are the comic books. And indeed, Dennis was quite the enterprise back in the day. We were all lucky for that because, as I think I might have mentioned before, I remember reading these comics when I wasn't feeling too well, and they always brought a laugh, helped the healing process whenever I was feeling under the weather, as kids often do. Well, okay, let's get to the matter at hand. Ron Ferdinand. We're going to talk Dennis. Let's talk to the man himself, Ron Ferdinand, who has been doing Dennis almost as long as Hank Ketchum himself. There's a lot of ground covered in this interview. Not only do we talk about Dennis the Menace and cartooning and all of that, but we also get into discussions about life in general, Ron's life. And there's some interesting facts about Ron that you may not know. So here we go. Ron Ferdinand and myself in conversation.
I have no desire to retire. I don't. See, the beauty of these characters was the design. They're like so fun to draw, you know.
Yeah.
So you never really get tired, and you never really feel like you mastered them. You know, I always look at my work and go, darn, I missed Alice there. I missed Henry there. I missed, you know. So it's always a challenge to kind of capture them, you know.
There's a quality of the designs, the character designs, it's really kind of interesting that sort of reflects a little bit on Ketchum's background.
Absolutely.
In animation.
Yes.
You know, they're very lively. There's that quality of that organic quality, that flowing from the pen, and there's a certain kind of freedom within them.
A structure too. But you know, when I started, I mean, the first thing he did was give me the model. You know, so remember I said my dream was, so it was kind of like working at Disney because like he sent us out sketching. We had model sheets to work from. You know, all the characters had model sheets that Hank had drawn himself. You know, so that was part of it too. You know, they were all designed to be 3D. You know, characters. You know, to work every way. You know.
This blows me away because he had literally designed the characters the way one would design them for an animation studio.
Yes. Yep.
And laid it out that way in a lot of ways. I mean, after maybe 55 or so, Dennis is pretty much set, right? I mean, there's not a lot of change in those characters. Early on, Dennis looks like he's maybe 3.
Oh yeah.
You know, but as time goes on, he gets to be about 5 or so, I guess.
Yes.
It seems like.
Yes. Hank, every year he celebrates his 6th birthday, then he goes back to being 5. I mean, that was Hank's, thing. So, yeah.
So they're different from, one of the things I think about is that to draw Dennis and and I haven't drawn them in a long time. I used to play around with it. It was fun, but they're more giving and a little more rewarding in a way than trying to draw Charlie Brown is like the most frustrating thing in the world.
It's hard.
It's so hard.
Yes.
It's Charles Schultz's, one little eye out of sync with the other.
Exactly.
And the whole thing is shot.
Yeah.
And Dennis has a little more flexibility.
Yes.
In there.
Yeah. Playing around with it. Yeah. It's true. It's true. I've tried to draw Charlie Brown. It's impossible.
It is impossible.
Yeah.
All of those characters are so much a part of his own personal handwriting. And they're reflective of, each idiosyncratic move of his hand.
Right.
Whereas as with Ketchum's drawings and with yours and then with Owen Fitzgerald's, and there's a kind of freedom. And I don't want to say that, you still have to stay on model. But
different. I mean, Owen's Dennis was different from like, what's his name, Bob Bugs
or Bob Bugs,
Weissman or Weiss. All the Dennis, you could tell they all had different styles.
Yeah.
Yep.
Very much.
They all worked on their levels.
Well, it's the same way of looking at Archie comics.
Yes.
Archie had different artists.
Yep.
And Dan DeCarlo and Stan Goldberg and Harry Lucy, and you can tell each artist from the other. It's all still Archie.
Yeah.
But you look forward to the different styles, you know.
Yes.
And, Dennis is very much kind of like that in that way.
Yeah.
But whereas with Schultz, you look at something that doesn't look like Charlie Brown, you know, from the old comic books or something, and you go, "Oh, that's not Charlie Brown."
Right. It's interesting because Weisman and Fitzgerald, two completely different styles.
Yes.
But they both worked, you know.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I mean, Fitzgerald I loved because he was loose.
Yeah.
You know, and I just loved his line and you know, but it was all very flowing and very loose, and I love it. And then Weisman is made very, you know, disciplined lines and straight lines, and you know, and yet they both worked, you know.
Yeah, they both worked. I mean, they're two different approaches, and Fitzgerald's, as you said, it's got that kind of organic quality, and I can see that in what you do. And Weisman's work is kind of singular in a way because it sort of takes that. There is that quality in Ketchum that lends itself to being interpreted in an architectural way.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's what Weisman seems to do. You know?
But
it's kind of
Hank did it too, but in a looser way. I mean, Hank did a lot of beautiful houses. I mean, you see, you know, but then again, he didn't use a ruler, so that line was never quite as, you know, straight as. But he still nailed it, you know. It was very.
He didn't, you know, drawing architecture is weird, you know, because if you don't have the command of the line, you know, you have to use a ruler. And, you know, but if you have the command, then it's cool to let it wiggle a little.
Yes,
you know?
Absolutely. That was it. I mean, Hank's line wiggled, but it's still, you can't explain it.
Yeah.
You know Shane Glines? Have you heard of Shane Glines?
No.
He's a teacher. He's an artist too. He's a cartoonist, but he if you go online, you'll see he does these teaching seminars. But he's a great artist too. But he commented. What he does is he travels around and he brings samples of his favorite cartoonists. You know.
Okay.
Yeah, and then he sits he's in this library and he gets to Hank Ketchum. He goes now I don't really say this much about. He goes, but I would have to say if. Hank Ketchum is probably my favorite, you know, cartoonist. He said, you know, on this thing. So then he said, Hank was good his whole career. I thought that was, you know, he said some cartoonists, they start out weak, they end up strong. They start out strong, they end up weak, you know, or whatever, as they evolve. He says, but Hank Ketchum was one of the rare artists that was good his whole career, you know. I always loved that. I just loved that line, you know.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great tribute to him.
Right.
And he was a taskmaster to himself too.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. He was his own. Yep. And you know, I guess you know, some artists had a hard time with it. You know, some early on. I mean, I don't know. I mean, but I was like, you know. I was like. But
those of you who stuck it out, you know, yourself and Marcus and others. Yeah.
Yeah, Marcus and I are pretty similar in temperament. You know, we both, you know, there's no pride there. I mean, as far as, you know, he's not going to say anything that's going to offend me or, you know, it's like, what he's saying is probably true, you know. And, but Hank was never nasty for the sake of being, you know, nasty. I mean, everything he said had a reason, you know. Yeah. And he was funny, too. He was very funny. So even when he was making, you know, even when he tell you something that, you'd laugh, you know. I mean, I laughed a lot.
He found a way to put it across.
Yes.
That's a rare gift too.
Yep. Really is. It is.
So, how has working on Dennis evolved for you over the course of this? What is it? 40 years now?
Is it 40? 40. It'll be 40. Let me see. 81. Next year, it'll be 40.
40 years.
Yeah.
So you're heading to, I mean, you'll have worked on Dennis almost as long as he did.
I wish I was as good. I wish I, you know, it's funny, but it's all in different, you know, I started out training and then the comics and I mean, then, it's just been a change. It's been living in different places but as I said, it doesn't really feel like work, you know. It's never did. It always.
Well, what's the process like? Like, so how does your week go when you sit down to work on Dennis on the Sunday?
Yeah. So I get scripts. You know, I'll get script email. I'll go through the scripts. Send Scott my input on which ones I think would work. Then he'll go over them. Sometimes he agrees. You know, and they'll send it back and say, okay. So then I'll get I'll get the go ahead from Scott. He goes, all right, he'll make some suggestions verbally in the script, or else he'll say something. So then I'll do a rough. I'll do a small rough. Send him the rough, and then he'll go over it, and he'll say, okay, yeah, maybe change this, make this. And he's very good at doing the title. With me, the titles are always like the title block, the title panel. I almost got to the. So he's really approaching it from a whole fresh perspective now. So he has a lot of fun with the titles.
Okay.
And so he'll do these great titles, great lettering, great layout. So the title page will be. So that's fun because then he's doing like all the thinking for the titles, and then I'll the rest of the strip I'll handle with the dialogue and everything. And yeah, so then I'll do a rough, and then he'll make suggestions. And then I'll do a finish. I'll do the ink, do the color guide, send him the ink and the color guide, and sometimes he makes it. Sometimes he usually doesn't by that time, because a deadline. We have to get it out. But sometimes he'll make it. He goes, if it's not too late, could you change this or that? And I'll go, sure, no problem. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. And then occasionally Marcus will say, he'll throw me a couple of daily gags. Could you kind of squeeze these in if you get a moment and whatever. So I'll do a couple of dailies here and there. And the Sundays, so things are flowing pretty, Scott and I have developed a real communication now, so we don't really have to say too much complicated stuff to get through it. I usually know exactly what he's saying, what he wants, and he knows exactly where I'm going. So so the communication has gotten less and less, it's more by feel now, and we're feeling each other more.
Yeah.
So I'm telling you, it's a dream. It's really a dream situation.
Has Scott inherited his father's criticality?
Well, he knows what he wants. I mean, he's respectful. He is good. I mean, if he wants something one way, he'll let me know. But it's not like a power thing or anything. He just and he'll sketch it out. I mean, most of the times if he wants something, he will show me visually what he wants, and then I'll have it. Sometimes if he says something verbally, I'll kind of get the feel of what he's talking about, but not quite sure. So then, but no, he's not. He's good with Marcus and I. We really work well together.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
How
and as
rare
I said,
is that?
And I said I'm kind of like I babysat him when he was young and a couple of times, and so I watched him grow up. So we have kind of a familial relationship. It's
And
really
so
good.
The business is like in his bones, really.
Oh yeah, I mean he's good. Yeah, and early on, Hank would show me his paintings. When he was in art school, and yeah, he's very talented. I mean, he's really, and he's kind of like Hank in that way. He'll if you want something a certain way, he'll sketch it out, and show you what he wants. So definitely, Stan, he's good with words. He's a good writer. He's a good editor. He's really, because Hank used to do that too. Hank was, he just know how to spin a phrase, how to knock a word out, put a word, and Scott's kind of inherited that,
Yeah. How many days does it take you to put together one Sunday? Is it like you're working 9 to 5, 5 days a week, or?
Well, it's time consuming in the sense that, I got to do the rough, send it, and then wait, whatever. I mean, he usually gets back to me pretty quickly. Right. But yeah, so then it depends on what's in the, some of them are more complicated than others,
Right.
Some of them, Dennis goes to the department store, then you're, bam, you got things to draw, Some of them are just discussions in the kitchen with Wilson or whatever. They get a kitchen table, you got, so it really depends on the subject matter of the strip. Some of them take 3 or 4 days,
Sure.
Some, if you really you got to research, what does this look like? What does that look like? And then, and some of them, take a day and a half, 2 days, whatever.
What are some of the most challenging ones? Is it involve things like drawing everything at a department store, or?
Yeah. But as I said, we're trying to simplify them, because of the size they are, and then, it's no good to clutter them up too much,
Right.
So yeah, we try to be simple and yet get what you need in there to tell the story. And how the expressions too, you have to really work, get the right expression, get the right lettering. I mean, it's tough. It just comes instinctively after a while, but you don't think about it,
Right.
But then,
and is Hank like looking over your shoulder in your mind as you're working?
I have his stuff. I have, a couple of his things around my desk, so he's never too far away. You know, and it's yeah, yeah. I'll tell you, I was really lucky, you know, to meet Hank. You know, I mean, he really, even Scott has said it. You know, he goes, my dad was kind of like a father to you, and which is true. You know,
Uh-huh.
my father died when I was really young. You know, working with Hank and, you know, going through that whole season of life, you know, having kids. I had my kids out there. I put my house out there, and having Hank there, it really was kind of almost a paternal relationship in a sense. I mean, he didn't get too personally involved, you know. He tried to keep it, you know, because he had his own family. But I mean, there was a real, you know, and Hank always used to tell me, you know, when I would draw something, and I lived in an apartment my whole life. So then when I was out there drawing lawns, drawing fences,
Yeah.
he goes, haven't you ever looked at a fence for, you know, he would be on me. He goes, why don't you buy one of these and, you know, see what it's like to have a real fence, you know. So he was always spurring me on to get, you know, stuff in my life that was real, you know. So, you know, you think about these things later and you go, wow, you know, it was really, what an influence he did have on you, you know.
Sure, he
And
made you look.
yes, yes. And he was, you know, when I bought my first house, he came over, bought a bottle of champagne, you know, and him and his wife and the kids, you know, they came and celebrated. So it was really, you know, it was a great relationship.
It
You know.
sounds like it, and it sounds
Yeah.
like he saw something in you
Yes.
beyond the artwork. You know,
Yes.
so he saw something in you that he knew he could cultivate.
Yeah.
And,
And that
and
was part of it too, because before I got hired, the other two people had already been working there for a few months, and they told me later on, they said, you know, because this thing went out, the interview with Judd Hurd, the magazine, he was getting inundated with
sure.
submissions, and they'd actually be working there in the office, and he'd come in with one of the resumes or portfolios, and he'd throw it on the desk, and he'd say, what do you think of this? And they'd look at it, and it would be some seasoned illustrator.
Hmm.
And they look at this guy's stuff and they go, it was unbelievably beautiful, you know, very magnificent stuff. And they go, oh, well, I guess I'll be, you know, picking up my last paycheck next week. And then Hank would go, no, he goes, I can't use this guy because he's already got his style. He's got everything down, you know, I need something I can, you know, whatever. So that worked. The fact that I was green and I really hadn't done much worked in my favor, you know. And another good thing was I drew the character. You know, when I sent him my initial submission, it was all the characters. I
Right.
just went out, bought the books, did pencil. I didn't ink anything. I just pencil sketched the characters. They were telling me all these other people were sending in their work. No one was sending in like Dennis, you know, their version of Dennis. They were just sending in their accomplished, you
Sure.
know, work. But Hank would look at it and say, well, you know, this guy's got his own, you know, whatever. So that kind of inadvertently worked in my favor, too. The fact that I decided to send sketches of the characters, you know. I mean, I still have them and I look at them and I go, well, they're okay, you know. But, yeah, so evidently that was, just, you know, a smart thing that I did unknowingly was just send, you know, so, yeah. So he was looking for people that he could kind of mold and
That's amazing.
yeah. Yeah.
And, you know, and it's amazing sometimes how these things work out. It's just like sometimes it's meant to be, you know.
Yeah,
And it sounds like it was the perfect gig for you,
right?
And you were the perfect guy for him.
Exactly.
You know.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, what kind of changes has the newspaper business has gone through a lot of changes, and so how has that impacted you, the way you work, Dennis the Menace in general?
Well, you know, the thing is, I'm in an area here where I'm in upstate New York,
right,
near the Catskill region.
Mm-hmm.
Where are you?
I'm near Binghamton, New York.
Oh, you're right here.
Yeah, not too far away at all.
Okay. You know, my son worked in Binghamton for a while at the paper.
Oh, really?
No, he worked in was it? What the heck is it? I forgot. I'm drawing a blank. Cortland.
Oh, okay, Cortland. Sure, not too far.
He worked there. He worked there for a while, for a year, I think.
Uh-huh.
In Cortland as an editor, as a reporter, as a crime reporter.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Fascinating. Oh,
so anyway, so locally I get the Poughkeepsie Journal, I get the Kingston paper, I get the Star the Jersey paper.
Okay.
And Dennis is, you know, so Dennis is still in like 3 or 4 of the papers that he's not in the Record. He's not in my
Okay.
local paper, unfortunately. The funny thing was, when I moved back here, they had just dropped it. It was funny because they had just dropped it in the local. Because when I used to come up here to see my relatives in the 90s and stuff, in the 80s, when I was come up here on vacation, he was in there. So then I think a year or so before I came back, they had already dropped the daily, and then the Sunday they had dropped. So when I moved back, the first thing I did was contact the paper and tell them I was living in Pine Bush, which is a local town. And I said, I'm living, and they were like, wow, the Dennis the Menace Sunday artist lived. So they sent a reporter out and did like a whole, like, center page article on me. The reporter came out, took my picture, my little home, I was working at my house, and, did a big interview with me. And they said, Dennis, and the headline was Dennis Artist. They never put it back in the paper. It was so weird. I thought, this is it, I'm back in. Because it was really like they were really excited, And then I thought, okay, and the time went on, it never came back. So I was kind of like, what the heck?
Oh, man,
So then every year for a while I would and they'd say it really wasn't their decision. They'd say it was done by the head, the other paper which owns their paper, or they kept saying it's out of their control, whatever. But I just thought that was funny, I mean, I think you can still see it if you go online on Record Online. On the Record Online, it's still on there.
I'll look for it.
But anyway, I'm still in like three or four papers around here.
Yeah.
That you can get, locally. So I'm not feeling, I know some areas. I talk to people. They go, well, we haven't gotten Dennis. So I don't really know. I mean, I try to stay away from the business end of it, numerically anyway, the numbers. Scott's, on all that stuff. So I'm like, I don't even want to know, really.
Yeah.
I kind of do it. I see him in my papers. That's good enough for you know what I mean. I know the whole industry. I know the whole industry is really in trouble.
Well, it is, and that's
especially now. Oh my God, with this virus thing. Oh man.
Oh yeah, things are terrible. Nobody wants to handle a newspaper. Question of handling cardboard. I mean, we get the mail.
Exactly.
I got an envelope today and picked it up. And I'm like, what do I do, man? Do I?
Yeah, I mean, nobody's buying it. I bought the Sunday Poughkeepsie Journal, and it was like the paper was like 4 pages. It was thin little nothing, and it did have the comic section still in it. But I'm thinking, wow, there's nothing. Nobody's buying the ads. Whatever.
Yeah, it's one of the papers I saw in the Daily Cartoonist. I think it was. I can't remember where this was, but it was somewhere out west. Paper just canceled all of its comics, canceled the entire comics page, because they can't afford features,
Absolutely.
And they don't want to let people go.
Yes.
So
my son is actually working for the Herald, the Record, the local
paper.
Oh,
okay.
And he's an editor now. Yeah, so they just started he day on day off because they don't want to let anybody go either. So they're kind of trimming his time back but he's still thank God he's still got a job.
Yeah, right. I mean, sure. Journalism has to continue, and I'd love to see newspapers continue. Although at the same time it's frustrating because, like for example, I've said this many times on this show. We had here in Binghamton, we had 2 great papers when I was growing up, and I think there were 3 before. And then they merged and were bought out by Gannett, and then Gannett has sold them like in the last 2 years. And I was hoping for a change in the paper, but literally it's gotten so thin. And while they have a really nice comic section, I have to say, give them that. The daily comic section, the Sunday comic section is terrible. Dennis is still there, but it's like, instead of being 8 pages filled with wonderful comics like it was when I was a kid. Instead, it's 2 pages. Yes. Mostly there's advertisements, and you can barely see the Sunday comics because what used to be a half a page is now like not even a third of a page. It's even smaller.
I know.
So it's very frustrating for those of us. I love newspaper comics,
Yeah. The Daily News, this is going back several years. They cut their from 4 pages to 2.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember when that came out because Greg Walker sent out a thing. They were going to drop Beetle,
Yeah.
So they said if anybody wants to put it. So I wrote to the news, I said I'll put in a good, I said I grew up on Beetle Bailey and sent in. But that's before I realized that they actually dropped not only Beetle, but they dropped 2 whole pages of comics.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just like they were dropping Beetle Bailey. They were dropping,
a bunch of things.
Yeah, it was crazy, you know.
It's you know,
And the Post, which actually the New York Post, which ran Dennis,
mm-hmm.
they don't have any comics anymore.
Right.
You know,
yeah.
they just dropped their whole comics thing, and that's Hearst. That's our business, our owners, Hearst. You know,
you mean
Hearst, and
it's owned by Hearst? Oh my God!
Yes, it's owned by Hearst, and they dropped the comics, and it was nice because they used to run the Dennis Sunday on Saturday because they didn't have a Sunday comic section, so they would run Dennis in black and white on the Sunday Dennis on Saturdays, which I thought was really cool to see in black and white.
Yeah, that is cool.
You know. So, anyways, yeah. So then they just all of a sudden they just dropped their whole comics thing. You know.
Yeah, and it's no, there's no telling where it's headed.
I know.
And as much as like, you know, and I have to tell you, I get most of the comics I get in my Instagram feed.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, really?
And I enjoy that. I do.
Yeah.
But it's not, you know, and I sound like an old geezer, but it's not the same thing.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you, a couple of years ago, DC Comics started putting out this thing. I think it was called Wednesday Comics, and it was a beautiful, big newspaper style. It was like the old Sunday comic sections, and they had all of their characters in these short little stories, and it ran for like 4 weeks. And I was so inspired by it. And a buddy of mine was too. We got together and we published for 4 issues. That's all we could end up doing. This anthology of independent cartoonists, each getting a big page, 17 by 24, and newsprint, you know. And I love doing that. It was a thrill to do that. Yeah. But, you know, it couldn't stay, you know, in comic shops. It wasn't going to sell in big numbers.
Yeah.
And we couldn't stay in business. So, okay, but we did it for 4 issues. But there's a thing about it, man. I just love you know, the old, you know, I grew up New York Daily News Sunday Comics. You know, Dondi on one page, on the back page, and Dick Tracy on the front.
Absolutely.
You know?
That was my thing, too. Yeah, Dick Tracy. Every Saturday night, I'd go down to the candy store.
Yeah.
They'd dump it on the sidewalk, and I'd see Dick Tracy. Because the Sunday Comics was the wraparound, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that was it, man.
And that was a great thing, you know?
I know.
You know, as fun as it can be to find all of this different, diverse comics online, and it is fun. It's great. Yeah. And it's got a lot of great benefits. There's still that thing about, man, newspaper comics.
Yes, absolutely. It is. I don't know. Maybe there'll be some kind of renaissance down the road. Who knows?
Yeah. Who knows? You just don't know. And going through what we're going through now.
Yeah.
Telling.
I'm hoping this is.
But Dennis is thriving still. And,
well, you know, Dennis. You know, my daughter is my daughter-in-law is a 3rd grade teacher in Kingston, not in Kingston, in Red Hook.
In Brooklyn.
No, up here, Red Hook.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's a Red Hook up here. So anyway, she teaches 3rd grade. So every year I do her class, you know, except this year, of course, because. But anyway, so what I do is she has like 27, 28 kids in her class. So I'll come in and I'll do a presentation, but a week before I go, she'll ask the class, she'll go, and these are 3rd graders, and she'll go, all right, how many have heard of Dennis the Menace? And maybe 1 or 2 hands will go up, you know. Yeah, you know. So, anyway, no, she's 2 weeks before I come. So then she'll raise, you know, they get 1 or 2 hands. So I'll send her, I'll give her a bunch of comic books. She'll go on YouTube and show the cartoons. She'll show the black and white TV show. She'll show the comic books. I'll do some sketches. So by the time I get there, these kids are so pumped up for Dennis, you know, because they've seen all this different stuff that Dennis is in, you know, all these different incarnations of Dennis on YouTube, on, you know, whatever. And so then they're all jazzed. So by the time I get there, so I'm thinking, you know, Dennis has such a history that it really wouldn't take much, you know, to just revive, you know, to get the excitement going, you know. I mean,
oh, absolutely.
You know, I mean, I don't know, whatever.
Well, you know, Paper Cuts is putting out the comic books. You know, at least they were. They've got 3 volumes of Wiseman, Fitzgerald, Fred Toole comics. And, awesome. And if those are in libraries or something, you know, you can get those in the hands of kids.
Right.
You know, because Dennis is a character who would appeal, I think,
to Warner Brothers is supposed to be working on another film.
Oh, Oh,
Yeah. Because
okay.
Scott told me they've been in touch with him, so they don't know. At one point, a couple of years ago, remember that movie, The Doll?
The Doll.
It was
No,
a
I don't
horror
know
movie
that
with the
one.
girl
Okay.
from Walking Dead. One of these.
Oh, okay.
Plays a nanny in England, and she
Okay.
goes to take care of this kid, and it's a doll. It
Oh,
was a horror. It was a horror movie.
okay.
Anyway, I forget who did it, but the guy who wrote that was supposed to be working on a screenplay for the next Dennis movie. I mean, this is what
Okay.
I even read in Variety or something. The writer, whatever, it wasn't gonna be a horror movie, but it was the same writer who had done that. So then, and that was a couple of years ago. So I don't know what happened with that. But Warner Brothers still has the rights to the film rights,
Yeah.
and they keep every once in a while we keep hearing that they're gonna come up with another. So who knows?
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
it's
yeah, that could give the franchise a big boost and introduce it to a whole new
oh
generation.
yeah, no, definitely,
Yeah.
and Jay North is still out there doing the shows, signing the 8x10s.
Oh, is he really?
Oh yeah, he's still yep,
He
and
still does
so
that.
I know it's funny. I mean, the world. I feel sorry for any. Look at all the major actors now who are doing like Netflix movies or
Yeah.
Hulu movies. All these big, hot, amazing stars are doing like these Netflix movies and stuff.
Yeah.
So
And people don't want to go to a theater now, and
yes,
you
all
know,
that now especially.
yeah, we just watched De Niro and Pacino in The
Yes,
Irishman,
right.
and
I mean, look at that. They're doing that was Netflix, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
Netflix
So
Scorsese film.
Yes, imagine that. Who would have dreamt years ago that Scorsese would be doing Netflix movies?
Yeah,
I mean,
sure,
you
but
know, it's not that I'm not downplaying net, but I'm saying it's a whole new market now.
yeah,
You
it's a
know,
whole new ballgame.
yes,
So, and when I read most of my King Features comics, I subscribe to online. I
yeah,
go to
right,
comicskingdom.com and pick
yeah,
up Dennis there,
yeah, yeah.
and
I just did a few,
read most of the stuff there.
yeah, I just did a few separate, social distancing cartoons on my
Ah,
own. I just did them on my own in the morning. I would post them on Facebook or something, just on the topic, just to kind of loosen up in the morning. I do some sketches and I'd post them. So I sent them to Scott, and Scott said, "Yeah, let's." So I just talked to King Features today, and they're going to put them on their site. You
oh,
know,
cool.
and yeah, just trying to get you got to stay current. Just try to get them out there, and they loved them. They said, "Oh, these are great." We'll use. So evidently they're going to post them somewhere on the Comics Kingdom site or something. Just to kind of stay current, stay because it's a natural.
Were
I
they
mean,
Yeah, of course.
Mr.
They're
Wilson.
featuring Dennis?
Yeah.
Oh,
So I had one with
okay.
Mr. Wilson sitting by the window, with his hands behind his back, behind his head, and he's, in a comfortable position, and Dennis is outside, looking at him through the window, and he's telling Martha, he goes, "I should have thought of this social distancing thing years ago." You know, so I mean, it's such a natural for
That's
Dennis.
great.
Yeah. So it's just a constant challenge to kind of just stay. But then again, we're not going. I don't think we're going to use it in the strip because the strip will not. It's not a current event thing. Like I think
Yeah.
it would be out of character. At least that's what I'm getting the feel of from Scott. That he doesn't want to bring this whole disaster into Dennis's world.
Right,
I
and
mean,
that's because Dennis is in I mean, it's a distinct fictional world.
yes.
It's not a political strip. It's not
Right.
a current
Exactly.
strip. Yeah,
Exactly.
and I guess that's one of the things that it's easy from an outside perspective to think, oh, Dennis shouldn't wear overalls anymore.
Yeah.
Dennis should,
Right.
be more current. But at the same time, if you've built this world, you realize there's a delicate balance
Yeah.
in regard to how it works, and
Right.
introducing like current events into it sort of is not right in terms of the daily strip in the newspaper,
Exactly.
is kind of puts it off balance a little bit.
Yes, which is what that was Hank's big, complaint with the Deke cartoons. Dennis was fighting secret agents over in Moscow and stuff like that or whatever.
Yeah.
And to Hank that was like incomprehensible. Even the movie, with Matthew, it all takes place in the neighborhood. Actually, you remember the film they had? What's his name? Switchblade Sam. They had the Switchblade Sam character,
Uh-huh.
which was the guy from Taxi. What's his
Uh,
name? You know, this airhead, the you know, the guy,
uh,
Jim. You know, Jim from Taxi.
Jim
Yeah.
from Taxi. Yes.
What the-
Okay. Yeah. He was in Back to the Future.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
I
So
can't
he's
remember
in
his
that.
name.
Yeah. He played the you know, Switchblade Sam, who's this like creepy guy who walks around the neighborhood in the Dennis movie, and then at the end he kidnaps Dennis. You know,
Like a
and
Home Alone kind of thing.
yes. And I remember at the time thinking, you know, to Hank, I said, "Wow!" And you know, he actually he was pretty evil. You know, I mean, he was funny, but he wasn't. And like he steals Margaret's. One day he's walking down the street, and he sees Margaret's doll, and he steals her doll just for the sake of it. You know, for stealing it. You know, so he was kind of a nasty guy.
Yeah.
But, and then at the end, you know, they're all, even Wilson mellows, and he's out looking for Dennis. You know, they're all out looking for Dennis, and I told Hank, I said, "Well, wasn't that kind of like extreme? You know." Little tense, and Hank agreed with it. He goes, if you don't have a life or death situation in a movie, you're going to lose your audience, you know.
Mhm.
So he kind of said I could see why, you know, he did that, because even like Home Alone, you know, they were going to use Macaulay Culkin, but I think at that point he was doing Home Alone 2 or something.
Oh, maybe getting a little older.
It was John Hughes, you know, it was John Hughes.
Right.
He produced it. He didn't direct it, but he produced it and wrote it. He wrote the screenplay, you know.
You know, it's interesting because I when I think about those comic books that I used to read, it's interesting how inventive they were, but how close they held to the world of the comic strip, in the sense that it was, you know, you didn't have necessarily, you know, evil villains showing up.
Yes.
It was all pretty domestic.
Yeah.
You know.
And you know, then they did the Dennis goes to Hawaii. Dennis goes there. Those were always fun.
Oh yeah.
And Mark, you know, I don't know if Marcus told you, but we were lucky enough to get in on the tail end of that whole. Hank sent us to Hawaii.
Oh man, no, he didn't.
Yeah, that was great. Like that was, you know, but it wasn't for a comic. It was for the newspaper. He did 3 weeks of Hawaiian gags, and then 2 Sundays, you know, sandwiched in there. So so Marcus and I got to go to, you know, Hawaii with our wives.
Nice, man.
And that was fun. You know, we did. The funny thing was, the 2 Sundays I did were both on the plane. One going there and one coming back. So the Sundays had nothing to do with being in Hawaii. They were both on the plane there and back.
Hey listeners, I hope you're enjoying the podcast. I hope you're enjoying today's interview. If you are and you want to show support, head on over to my Patreon page. That's patreon.com/Jeff Grogan. At Patreon, you can contribute as little as $1 on a regular basis to ensure the longevity of this podcast. Your support will help keep it not only commercial free, but free to the listening public. And in exchange, you'll get some pretty neat stuff. There are at least 3 different tiers. Each level offers its own distinct rewards. So check it out today at patreon.com/Jeff Grogan, GeoffGrogan. Any amount is welcome, and your support is greatly appreciated. Thanks again, and that's patreon.com/Jeff Grogan.
But Marcus did all the, you know. So while I don't know if he didn't tell you any of this Hawaiian stuff, huh?
No, he didn't tell me about.
Yeah, so one day we would, you know, touring around and stuff, and we went to, and they have Don Ho's. You remember Don Ho?
Yeah, of course.
So there were Don Ho's. There were restaurants at the at a couple of malls. They had Don Ho restaurants. So we went. You know, we said, let's go in. So we went to Don Ho, and who's sitting there but Don Ho? He just happened to be there that day, and there he is with the big straw hat on. And his, you know, flowered shirt, and he was sitting like a couple tables away. And we looked at him and he said, Marcus, isn't that Don Ho? So we went over and introduced ourselves, and we did a sketch with him and posed for pictures, and, you know.
Did Don Ho show up in that Hawaiian comic book? I don't remember.
No, he did not.
Okay.
I don't think he, I was thinking about it. I don't know. Did Dennis goes to Hawaii? I'm not sure. Actually, I'm not sure. I haven't looked at it. But that was a lot. Actually, that I think is the best. Isn't that like the bestseller ever? Dennis?
Yes, bestseller ever.
The top 10 best-selling comics ever or something?
In the history, yeah, I know. Yeah. It's pretty impressive.
Right.
Yeah, so I can't remember that.
So we just happened to luck out and get in on the tail end of... Because he used to do that all the time with his artists. You know, all those travel books, They all got to, like Fred Toole used to tell us, every time they did Dennis Goes Here, Dennis Goes There, they got to go. Him and one of the artists,
What was Fred Toole like to work with?
Fred was a great guy. He was quiet. He was a very quiet guy,
Mm-hmm.
and he had a nice little house, and we'd go over there. Okay, him and Molly. Molly was a very sweet, outgoing lady, and they never had any kids.
Mm-hmm.
So everything, Fred had all these books on child psychology.
Yeah.
In his bookcase, but he was a great writer. He managed to write some, and yes, but he was very soft spoken, very quiet guy. But he just, it was really nice.
Now he worked on. I'm familiar with the comic books, but did he work on the comic strips as well? Did he write for those?
Yes, he wrote. When I was there, he was writing Sundays. Yeah.
Okay.
And then he retired eventually. While I was there, yeah, a couple of years. He made the transition. He wrote the comics, the Marvel deal, and then when that was over, Hank put him on. But then we had no more comics. So then I think he was writing Sundays for a while, and then I think they just kind of, said. So he retired, and he stayed. But we still saw him, but he kind of backed off a bit at that point, from writing.
Did you ever meet Wiseman or Fitzgerald?
No.
No. Okay, they were gone long before.
I met Lee Holly. You know Lee Holly, right?
I'm not familiar with
Ponytail. Remember the strip Ponytail?
Oh yes, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he worked for Hank. He started out with Hank, young guy.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah. He did Sundays in comics, and then he was another one. He loved Hank, and they had a great relationship. He really. So I talked. I mean, I wrote to him over the years, but never. I met him unfortunately at Hank's funeral. That was the first time I met him. But yeah, he started out with Hank. And then he had been working on this Ponytail character who was actually a teenage version of, the style by that time was Hank. So Hank was all for it. He said, go for it. So he said, but Hank loved him. So Hank was sorry. And then he sold Ponytail, So then he left and Lee was sorry because he never had anything but kind, he said Hank was great. He loved Hank. And Hank said, I think he left a little too early. For me, I really liked him. Mm-hmm. So yeah, but then he made a fortune in real estate, and he was a pilot. He had his own plane. And then a couple of years ago, he was in Monterey flying, and he crashed.
Oh man, that's terrible.
His plane took off, and then just made a beeline, nosedived into the ocean.
That's awful.
And it was a shocker.
I actually I just pulled up Ponytail on my iPad, and I remember seeing this. I've seen it many times, and it's beautifully done. It's a wonderful strip.
Yeah.
But it didn't have as much success as he would have hoped.
Well, yeah. I think he had maybe 20 years, whatever it was.
Well, that's pretty darn successful.
Yeah. No, it got for a while there it was doing well. Yeah, I don't know what happened. I mean, he kind of, and then by that time he was rich though. Because I knew people who knew him, and he said, he made some good investments, and so he was doing okay,
Yeah,
and
that's great.
And then he did some Warner Bros. I think he did Bugs Bunny too. Because a few of the things he sent me, he had bugs in them, and Porky Pig. So I think he was doing some Warner Brothers stuff too for a while there.
Was doing working on your own strip, is that something that ever appealed to you, or was?
I tried before. I did a couple of submissions with the syndicates before while I was still looking for work. Even before I got in touch with Hank. And I got my rejection letters and stuff. And then the funny thing was, one of the writers was one of Hank's writers had an idea for a strip. So he contacted me and he said, Ron, I have this idea for this strip, and Hank found out. I don't know how he found. I think he was listening because he would call me in the office. The strip was going to be called Gravestones, and it would involve very little. It was just with different gravestones with famous people, and it said, they died from this or that, in some kind of relation to their lives, whatever. It was going to be one of those things. And Hank, he told me, somehow or other he found out about it, and he said, Ron, I really, I hired you for Dennis, and I appreciate it if you would concentrate on. And I had just started, so I was relatively new.
I see.
I mean, he didn't threaten me. He just kind of said, Ron, I would appreciate it if you would kind of, keep your, eyes on Dennis right now because you're trying. So that was it. Once he said that, I said, fine. And I don't think the strip would have gone anywhere anyway. That he wanted, he did want us to, focus.
on.
Yeah.
And that's why he hired you. And
Yes, absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, I would never. I mean, I was just talking to this guy because he had the. I never, even if it meant, if there was, if I had gotten an inkling that, it was going to be any kind of problem, I would have said no.
Yeah.
But some of these writers, they got all sorts of irons on the fire.
Well, I guess being freelance,
Oh yeah.
right?
Oh, absolutely. I can understand that. So.
Yeah.
So I don't even know whatever. He ended up passing away, but.
And do you do is Dennis your sole artistic occupation, or do you
Oh yeah.
like
Yeah.
freelance? Dennis is it. Okay.
Yeah, Dennis is it. I mean, I do, amazingly, a lot of fan mail. So still.
Oh, I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Someone, a few months ago, I saw your post on. Somebody posted something somewhere, because all of a sudden I got inundated with fan requests, and I didn't know what, all from email, and I didn't know what. And one person said, I saw that you're doing, sketches, whatever, and I do them, I love to do them. Hank, surprisingly, his biggest thrill was waiting for the mail to come.
Oh yeah.
Yes, it would come, and he did all fan mail. He loved answering fan mail. He would. I mean, if you go on eBay, I bought several of his sketches that he did for fans.
Oh man.
Yeah, he was doing little 5x7 index cards. So I bought a couple. I bought a couple on eBay over the years. That he's done. Yeah, he loved answering fan mail.
Oh man, that's great.
So I do that. So I get a certain amount of that, and then there's charity auction the pieces here and there.
Yeah, you've got enough to keep on your plate.
Well, yeah. There's enough to do. I mean,
without actually having to yeah, sure. And especially at this point in your career, you don't need to search for work. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I am.
And do you do conventions? Do you go to comics?
It's not. No, I've really cut back on traveling a bit.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't really enjoy traveling anymore. I mean, as far as flying to wherever, I just I'll do. I've done a couple of local things and schools. I'll do like schools and like my daughter-in-law school and stuff like that occasionally. But yeah, like the convention thing. I'm kind of like played out.
It's a different. Did you do that when you were younger? Did you?
Well, I used to. The National Cartoonist Society every year. I went. I mean, Hank, by the time I came on board, Hank had already done his stint in the 60s with the NCS,
Mm-hmm.
He was like there. If you look in the early NCS pictures from the late 50s, early 60s, Hank's there. It's Hank, Mort Walker, all these guys, Milt Caniff,
Yeah, the big ones.
So by the time I came on board, Hank was kind of like, not really that involved with them anymore. But they did, he won the what is it called? The Reuben.
Award.
It was the Billy DeBeck Award before it was the Reuben Award. I think it became the Reuben Award in like late 60s, whatever it became it. But before that was the Billy DeBeck.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
Which was like a plaque. It was some kind of plaque. So what they did was later on, everyone who had won the Billy DeBeck Award, they gave him a Reuben,
Okay.
To give them, because it was like the Reuben, became the Reuben. So he did his, so they did it, and I think, who was in, Mel Lazarus, I think, was president at the time. And he was like, so they were going to award Hank his Reuben. So he had to do it in Carmel because Hank couldn't travel anywhere, So, Mel Lazarus was funny. He says, I have to go to the guy's backyard to do this presentation, Probably he's not going to show up, So, yeah, so they did this. It wasn't, so, they had it in, but it wasn't the Reuben weekend. It was like a special thing they did where they presented Hank with his Reuben Award, But it was funny, It was
in his
funny.
backyard.
Yeah.
It's great.
But he did go to San Francisco. We did it one year in San Francisco, which he came to, so that was fun.
Yeah.
And then, and I Mort Trucker just passed away, Mad Magazine.
Yeah.
So on Facebook, I told a story. I was up in San Francisco for that, and Hank was there. So I had never met Mort Trucker before, and he was one of my idols,
Mm-hmm.
Growing up. Oh my God, Mad Magazine.
We all loved him. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, that was it for me.
Yeah, he was amazing.
Oh yeah, just incredible.
Yeah.
So he was there, So I had my, during the dinner there was like a little social time. So I went over to him trembling, and I said, Mort, I just wanted to say that, I grew up on your work and I'm a big fan of yours. So you're a very nice guy. Have you ever met him?
No, I never had the
Yeah,
pleasure.
very humble guy, very, very sweet. And so he looks at me and he looks down at my name tag, and it was Ron Ferdinand, Hank Ketchum Enterprises, something like that on my name tag. It had either had Dennis the Menace or Hank Ketchum, whatever it was on there. So he looks down at it. He goes, "You work for Hank Ketchum?" So I said, "Oh yeah, I want to." He goes, "Could you introduce me?" So I was like, "Are you kidding?" So I actually had the pleasure. I brought him over to Hank, and I said, "Hank, this is Mort Drucker," and he was like a kid. He said, "Mr. Ketchum, I'm a huge fan." So it was so funny seeing that,
Oh,
coming
that is
from him.
unbelievable.
Yeah. So they had a great kind. I stood there and listened to the two of them talking, about the old days and in the early '60s and stuff, and
Oh
yeah.
my gosh.
So I was blown away that he had never met. He was like a kid. He said, "Could you introduce me?"
Isn't that strange to,
Yes, I
one of
know.
your idols and
Yes,
he's idolizing your boss?
I know. It was
Oh my God.
incredible. Yeah.
Incredible indeed. And Hank certainly sounds like he was a great boss.
Oh, he was. No, he was a great guy. I mean, I had nothing but good memories.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Karen too. She loved him. And Marcus. Marcus. Never really worked with him directly on one-on-one,
Right.
except for that week. But we had fun that week. So yeah,
Well,
it was great. We hit it off right away, Marcus and I.
yeah, and he's a great guy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I altogether it sounds like a great experience, an
Oh
ideal
yeah. I mean,
experience.
it's like you couldn't have made it up.
Yeah, no way.
Or you couldn't have foreseen it. You couldn't have. The way it happened was just unbelievable.
Yeah, but it also seems to have happened to two of the greatest guys, yourself and Marcus, who really,
Well,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah,
were perfect for the job.
yes,
And
yeah.
and Dennis owes his longevity in part not only obviously to Hank and his tutelage, but also to the work that you've done. And
Well,
you know,
in my small way, I guess. I mean,
well, hey
I
man,
well, you know
you,
what I do like on Facebook? I every day I post a classic Hank cartoon.
oh, you do, okay.
I do. I mean, I have about 50 followers. So I just try to do my best, to keep Hank's work out there. I don't have to do much because if you go on, there's all sorts of Hank, fan clubs like Shane Glines. He's contemporary art, but he has a huge, following
Yeah.
of contemporary artists too, who say Hank Ketchum was like, the best. I mean,
Well,
just
and a lot of people look back to him, and I think seeing some of the early work, it's true. I think there is kind of a lot of younger cartoonists who look back at Hank Ketchum's stuff
yes,
and are blown away by the
yes.
quality
Oh
of
yeah, the
his
comments I
craftsmanship.
get, when I post Hank stuff, they go, "Oh my God, that line, you
Yeah,
know, that line or that layout, that
yeah,
everything is and they start, they'll start like analyzing it, and say everything is and they'll go through it like a study, and they'll say, "Look at that, the cameras, everything's pointing toward Dennis, everything in the composition," and they'll start to analyze it, and they'll go and realize, "Oh my God, this guy was amazing."
he
People
really
who
was.
who never really, thought about it.
I mean, we just exactly the newspaper comics as a kid, you don't really think about who's doing
Yeah,
them, what they're doing. But if you're an artist and you get older and you look back at this stuff and you want to find out, and you come to realize he was a master.
yeah. I mean, he's definitely up there. You
Yeah,
know,
definitely.
when, when the final story's told,
Yeah.
whatever. You know, yeah.
Hank Ketchum's going to be high on the list.
Now, what do you teach? Are you a professor?
Yeah, I'm a university professor at Adelphi
Ah,
University in Garden City, New York. I live in Binghamton. We used to
Garden
live in
City.
Brooklyn.
Where's that? Because there's a
It's
Garden City, Long Island, too, right?
Yeah, well, that's where it is. Garden City. It's Garden City, right next to Queens, right next door.
Oh my God! Wait a minute. You commute?
I commute. Yeah, I go down like on
Oh,
a Monday or Tuesday, and I stay for a couple of days, and I come back.
oh my goodness! Wow.
I
Yeah.
I lived
Oh,
in Brooklyn.
neighborhood. I mean, Jackson Heights was my That's
Yeah,
right.
and
Yeah.
I mean, I've been over to St. John's and stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, I know the area pretty well. We lived in Brooklyn.
Wow.
for 15 years. So,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
It's
So,
something I never, I grew up in Manhattan. I was born in Manhattan on 68th Street and West End Avenue, which is Lincoln Center now.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I was born in 51, and it was an Italian ghetto.
man.
When I was Italian, my mother, my five sisters and a brother, and we all, it was like within like for about 5 or 6 blocks, like 63rd to 69th or whatever it was. It was like a ghetto. It was really tenements,
Hmm.
and they
Hmm.
were pretty rough, but it was all Italian, or predominantly Italian.
Right.
So I grew up there, and it was like, yeah. So in 57, 58, what was it, 57 or 58, they threw us all out. They filmed West Side Story,
Right.
the movie, and then they tore it all down and built Lincoln Center. The whole.
Yeah, yeah. That was in the early 60s, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes. West Side Story was like 61 or whatever, 62. So
yeah.
my mother and we moved, so all my aunts and all my cousins, we all picked a different borough. So we went
Uh-huh.
to Queens. One of my aunts went to the Bronx. One went to Astoria, or
Hmm.
not the borough. It was Bronx. One went to New Jersey,
Right.
and yeah. So we all spread out. We all went all over the place. And then one day my mother took me. I was like 9 or 10, whatever I was, and she took me down to watch the filming of West Side Story.
Okay.
So we took
The
the
old
train
neighbor.
in, and we stood there and watched my old block. They were literally dancing up my block
Oh
where
my
I
God.
grew up. And my sister said, I've never seen it. She said her initials are, and there's one scene where they're dancing on the street, and my sister's initials are on one of the walls.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like a heart with her and her boyfriend. You
Oh
know,
my God.
and she said, and I've yet to see it, but she swears it's there.
It's there. You're gonna have to buy that. You have a,
I do have it, and I've
yeah.
never really taken the time to
Watch it frame by frame.
by frame, yeah. But yeah, so then we moved out, we moved to Queens, and then I grew up there. Saw the Beatles at Shea Stadium in '66.
Oh, did you really? I
I
saw
was,
a
yeah.
photograph of you with Beatle statues behind you. Yeah.
Oh
You-
yeah, in my room, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, in your study
I'm
or
a huge
something.
Beatle fan. So yeah, so '66 that was their last tour.
Yeah.
So yeah, my friend and I could walk to Shea Stadium from my house.
Okay.
But I didn't. But I mean, I took the company. So yeah, he and we went and sat up there, and then
Oh, fantastic.
we were way in the back. We were way
Oh
up
man.
high. But
Yeah.
yeah, they were, their
I
last tour. I didn't know it was going to be the last tour then.
Yeah, nobody did, right? But
Yeah, that was
I'm a big Beatle fan too, so
yeah. I was at
understand.
Bangladesh,
Oh, wow, cool.
Madison Square Garden. Yeah, in 70. What was that? 70, 71.
Yeah, 71.
Went to
Yeah.
the afternoon show. There were two shows. There was one in the afternoon, one at
Awesome.
night. Went to the
Yeah, you saw
So
some
that was
great
cool.
stuff.
Yeah, I saw McCartney one day in '75.
Ah,
I was walking down Madison Avenue with my we weren't married yet. I had my guitar, and we were going to Central Park to play music.
oh,
And
cool.
it was like 6 o'clock on a Saturday evening in this is the mid '70s, so it wasn't crowded at all. It's not like now where it's all the time. You can never get a breathe. Back
Yeah.
then it was 6 o'clock Saturday. It was a nice evening, and there were a few people on the streets, but it wasn't. It was And who comes walking up? Paul, Linda, and her father, John Eastman.
Oh my God.
The three of them are strolling up the street, and here I am with my guitar, and coming toward me is Paul McCartney. The reason I'm carrying this guitar, and I didn't have the guts to say, well, they were deep in conversation, so I wasn't gonna. But I said, "Oh my gosh, there!" Walked right by him,
Oh my God. And it
carrying my
stopped
guitar.
there.
Yeah.
I was
So
at an art gallery once where it was a Paul McCartney opening, and it was a benefit. And my wife was working for the place that it was being benefited, so we were able to go to this. And he came in, and at the time he was with Heather Mills, so it was
okay,
after Linda had passed.
right.
Anyway, I had to introduce myself and say, "You've changed my life," all that stuff, But the rest of the night, I just stared at him, and
Oh, really?
everybody in the room was just staring at him.
Yeah.
I mean, that's all they were doing. And I remember saying this to my wife. I said to Deb, do you think he knows that everybody in the room is like just staring at him? And this lady walked by me, and obviously she was a friend of his or something. And she said, "Oh, he knows," and
Oh, yeah.
it was like, it blew my mind. Just there was this guy,
Yeah.
looked just like Paul McCartney.
Yeah.
And he was talking and gesturing, kind of expressively, and he almost bumped this lady who was walking behind him, and he turned around and he stopped and he put his arms on her and he said, "I'm sorry, love, you
Yeah.
okay?" He did
I can
he
imagine.
didn't mean to bump her. And
Yeah.
everybody in the room was just like transfixed, you
Yeah.
know? It's
Oh,
a,
yeah.
one
No,
of the two big Beatles, but
yes. Yeah.
it's a trip. But anyway, were you, speaking of Queens and all, were you a Mets fan?
I wasn't really. Not really. I wasn't a baseball. I was not a sports guy.
Oh, okay.
I went to a couple of Mets games, but yeah, I wasn't really into sports. Both my son, I don't know where they got it from. They're both heavily into sports. They
Okay.
didn't get it from me, but yeah, I kind of, I don't know. I mean, I went to the concerts at Shea Stadium. I saw, the Rascals and
Oh man.
saw
Oh
the
God.
Rascals there, the
Now I
Beatles.
love the Rascals.
Yes, yeah,
Great band.
I know. And then so in Flushing Meadow Park, they had the
Uh-huh.
all the stuff going on there.
Oh man.
And yeah. Remember the Beau Brummels?
Yes. What was their tune?
Laugh, laugh.
Yeah,
Laugh.
yeah.
They
Yep.
had two songs there. I can say yes, I know. Cry just a little 'cause I love you so.
Oh yeah, man.
So I was in a band. I was in a band in the 60s called the Northern Lights.
Okay.
So we did just a little.
Oh, okay.
And one of the guys in the band, his sister was married to a photographer, a big hotshot in Manhattan. So anyway, so we had this band. So, we played local dances and stuff. So his sister, so anyway, her sister's boyfriend has hotshot at New York photography, this party. And it was in the Village. He had a studio in the Village, and he invited all these like artists and musicians and everything. So we invited the lead singer of the Beau Brummels.
Oh, cool.
I forget his name. And, they had a couple of years. I mean, they weren't big for long. They had like 2 songs, I think, whatever. But we were doing one of their songs at that time. So we found out he was going to be there. So here we are singing his song, and he's standing there listening to us, I mean, that was
been a
big.
thrill for him, man.
Not for him, for us.
Well, yeah, but for him too, to hear somebody else do a song, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, we were young. We were like, I don't even know how good we were at that point. But it was just funny, to so that was kind of like exciting, to play a song for one of the Beau Brummels who's,
Do you still play music?
I do. I in church. I'm on like a worship team.
Okay.
At a band. Look, my son that plays drums, so it's in New Paltz. It's a lot of young people. It's a hipster, It's funny. Churches now, like all the worship music is like it's really hip. It's cool,
Yeah.
So it's a little younger than. I mean, I'm a little old. They look at me like the old guy. But I play bass once a month. I'll play bass. I play bass.
Okay.
And I play guitar, but I play bass with them. My son plays drums, so I just did it just so I could play with be with my son.
Right. Oh, well,
so yeah, but they're really good. They're very dedicated musicians, and they're really good. They're really seriously into their music. But so yeah, that's it. I just do that like once a month, just to kind of play, Yeah.
It's great though, man. You keep it going. That's really cool.
Yeah, it is. It is. Now I haven't seen my grandson in a month. Because of his wife.
Oh yeah, because of COVID.
School teacher, she is like manic, so she won't let us near him.
Yeah.
So we go out there and we'll sit. Him, his wife, and the baby. He's like a year and a half, but we will watch it. We're babysitting for him 2 days a week.
Oh yeah.
Before this happened, so he was here 2 days a week. So I had such a bond with him.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually put him to sleep. My wife, she works at home too.
Uh-huh.
So what happened is he'd come over and I would know. I whenever he was too much, she'd give him to me and I'd rock him to sleep.
Oh.
So I had this thing with him, and it was such a close. And now so now we go out. So last Sunday we went out there, and they're in the lawn, and we get out of the car, and they give us the back off sign.
Mm-hmm.
So we stand like 6 feet away, and he looks at us, and he's like running toward us.
Yeah.
Grab him, and and he doesn't know what's going on.
Of course.
He'll see us, and he'll just start running, and they grab him, pull him back.
Oh
and,
man.
It's painful, So that's been tough.
Yeah. Well, I hope this thing is, we get this soon.
They're starting to say, right? They're starting to say that things might be peaking, or
Yeah. There's a lot of unknowns.
Yes.
We just don't know where it's going, and so you don't want to do it as
exactly
too quickly.
Yeah.
I think science is pretty clear on that, but
right. Well,
But eventually, we will.
imagine what it's going to be like when we all get together again. It's going to be unbelievable.
Yeah, it's going to be amazing.
It's going to be so bizarre.
I know. We're teaching. I'm doing all my teaching from
Yes.
home, and it's
Yeah,
a
at least you don't
weird
have to travel to
situation.
Queens, right?
What's that?
At least you don't have to travel to Queens,
Yeah.
right?
Oh man, it's so nice to be home
I'll
with my
bet.
wife all the time, and
Yeah.
it's much better. But
I'll bet.
it is different.
Yeah.
Although the things that I teach, I can do online pretty well.
And
So
what do you teach? You teach graphics, or you teach?
I teach a lot of comics. I teach comics history, animation history,
Wow,
teach
awesome.
character design. Uh,
Really?
yeah,
I,
I teach an illustration course. It's all
interesting.
pretty cool.
I got a friend. I got a friend up here at Orange County Community teaches cartooning.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's like university level stuff now. When we were
Yes.
growing up, it was like,
Right.
frowned
Right.
upon.
Yep.
You know,
Yeah,
now
him
we can
too.
teach
Him
it in
too.
school.
He's very serious about it,
Yeah, yeah.
And it's, yeah, he's. I do his class too So he waits until like the last couple of class. He teaches, 2 quarter. Actually I knocked it back to one semester. He used to do it twice a year. Now they knocked it back to one.
Oh,
But
yeah,
anyway, so like one of his last few classes, I'll come in and
yeah. That's
do
a
my
thrill
thing.
for the kids, I'm sure.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So then, and so yeah, so that I do that too. So
That's great.
I could teach though. I don't think I could teach.
Well, it's the thing, it's a performative thing,
Yes, yes.
and I remember when I started out, it was a matter of sink or swim. I'm
Yeah.
not one of those guys who ever put myself forward very well. I know that I'm like the
Uh-huh.
worst salesman for myself in the world.
Right.
So, in terms of freelancing or anything like that, I just never had the confidence. And
Uh-huh.
so when I stumbled into teaching accidentally, and because I ended up teaching in a Catholic school when I needed to buy a car. I had a job, but I needed another job to get this car. So I
Wow.
got this part-time job teaching in a Catholic school, and I was a terrible teacher. And I swear to God, I was never
You
going
got your you
to
got
get.
your bachelor your master's?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
I went on to I went to Pratt and finished my
Oh
graduate
okay.
degree
Oh,
there,
wow.
and in painting and art history.
Uh-huh.
And then, but cartooning was always there in me. And so it sort of returned in my 30s and overtook the painting. So I do mostly that now. And
I know when I do a class, once in a while I'll do a class and then she'll keep me on for two periods.
hmm
And by the end of the second period, I am wiped. I am like exhausted.
yeah, I could see. And
Oh,
when I first started teaching, you do get used to it, but it
yeah.
is a matter of, it's like putting on a show in a way.
Yeah.
You have to perform, and
Right.
then you have to engage, and be connected all the time. It's very different than working in your studio
Oh
alone,
no,
you know.
I can't imagine.
Yeah, so
Herb
it's a different
Trimpe?
life. Yeah.
Have you heard Herb Trimpe?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, yeah,
Loved his stuff.
yeah, yeah. He was a teacher. He taught up here.
Okay.
I met him years ago, and it was probably late '90s. I went to this thing in Kingston. It was like a mocha.
Uh-huh. Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, yeah. I went Joe Staten's house. It was at Joe
Okay.
Staten's house.
Yep.
And I'd never met any of these guys. I was invited up there, so I went, and Herb Trimpe was there. So I was talking to him, and he was teaching at high
Right.
school. And this is after his Hulk work and everything,
Oh,
you know.
yeah.
So I said, he had no degrees. He had nothing. He said no. He goes, I'm doing this totally by the seat of my pants.
Amazing.
He goes in there, and I think he did it for a few years.
He did. Yeah. I had heard about
Right.
that because
Okay, you heard about that, yeah.
yeah, Marvel went through a whole thing and he wasn't working for him anymore.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was a shame. And then he passed away not
Yes.
too long
Yeah.
ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I loved
Funny,
his
'cause
stuff.
he's like, he's like, I don't know what I'm doing. He told me, I just go in there and they want to see my plan, and I have, I just go in there and draw,
Yeah. Just work it out.
And but most of the teachers I had at visual arts were kind of like, pretty loose,
Yeah. Sure.
They didn't kind of.
Did
They'd
you?
walk in and out, they'd all right, work on your stuff, and I'd sit there, then they'd come around and draw, and then they'd walk away, Not all of them, but some of them were like, kind of laid back,
Yeah. Oh, well, who did you work with at SVA? Anybody like, that we would know?
Howard Beckerman.
Oh, sure. Okay.
Yeah, I had him. I had animation history. He was good. I had him. Yep. For my animation history, I think it was. No, not an animation class. So he had us doing work. I took
Howard
animation.
Beckerman.
I'm sorry?
Howard Beckerman.
Yes.
Yeah,
He's still alive. He's still around. Gray beard. He has a tall guy, gray beard. I still see him occasionally online on certain things. He's still around. I mean, he was old back then, and I don't know how old. But then,
I know who he is. Yeah.
So
Okay.
Richard Williams. He just passed away recently.
Oh yes, right. Yeah, Richard Williams,
Yeah.
of course.
So when I was there, the year I was there, Richard Williams, the Christmas Carol had just come out.
I love that film.
Yeah. So it just came out. So he was going to have a showing at one of the museum at somewhere in Lincoln Center, one of the theaters. Yeah. So he spoke at the Visual Arts, and then he was going to have this thing there. So he was looking for volunteers to usher. So I volunteered. I said, "Yeah, I'll volunteer."
Awesome.
So he showed the Christmas Carol, and he told the story behind him. And then he showed his commercials. So I was ushering, so I had to spend the whole evening ushering, and I missed the whole thing.
Oh man!
I was like, "Why did I do this?" Because I had to usher people in, I had to do all sorts of stuff. So every once in a while, I'd look in there and I'd see Richard Williams up there talking, and I go, I'd be working.
Did you get any thanks for it or anything?
Yeah, no. Howard Beckman was very thankful, but it was kind of like, why did I agree to do this?
Yeah, because it would have been better. Well, Richard Williams was brilliant.
Yes.
The Christmas Carol was one of my all-time favorite pieces of animated film.
Amazing.
It's a brilliant film.
And talk about tragedy, right? The Thief and the Cobbler.
Oh, I hate that story. Oh, isn't that it's terrible?
He lost, right? He just kind of.
He couldn't finish it on time.
Yes.
He's too much of a perfectionist.
Yes.
To let it go. And ultimately, they took it from him.
Yes.
That's a heartbreaking story.
Yeah, it is. It's really a
heartbreaking story. So what we have left from him is, all these bits and pieces.
Yes.
And a beautiful animation, unbelievable animation.
Yes.
All hand drawn.
Yep.
All hand drawn, not computer. Amazing stuff.
Yeah.
Well, Ron, this has been great.
I think I probably went on longer than you wanted to, right?
Oh, but hey, man, you know what? You've got so much stuff so many stories, and there's so many places where we overlap that.
Yeah.
We can go on all day.
Garden
Maybe
City,
we'll do another show.
All right.
So it's been a thrill to have you on the show, and
I appreciate you inviting me.
Oh, hey, man, this is great talking to you and talking to Marcus, and then maybe in the future we'll talk to Scott. It's kind of a nice thing to keep Dennis the Menace alive and in the public eye, in a different way, and to help celebrate it, because it's a wonderful comic strip.
Yeah.
And
have you seen any of the interviews with Hank Ketchum on YouTube?
Oh, I haven't looked for those.
Yeah, look for them. He does one with Larry King.
Okay.
And there's a couple of them on there.
I will look for those.
Yeah, they're pretty good. Because he was funny. He was just naturally a funny guy, and he So I don't know. You might find him interesting.
I'm sure I will. I've always loved him as an artist and always loved Dennis, but my respect for him since talking to both of you has just grown immeasurably.
Well, that's great.
Then, because he just sounds like such a great guy in so many different ways.
Yeah,
very impressive person.
Yeah.
And you've done your part in keeping Dennis alive and in the public eye.
Well, I appreciate that.
You certainly have, and it's been great to have you on, Ron.
Yep.
And I hope we get a chance to meet one day.
Yes, you're not that far.
No, it'd be cool. I'd love to come to your studio and see, where Dennis is, where the magic happens.
Yeah.
So that will do it for our discussion with Ron Ferdinand. I'm kind of sorry to see our little celebration of Dennis the Menace come to an end, but here it is. We have talked to Marcus, we've talked to Ron. One of these days, maybe we'll have a chance to talk to Scott Ketchum and hear it from Mount Olympus, I guess, if one wants to think of the Ketchum Enterprises that way. Certainly he's the heir to the throne. Anyway, Scott, if you're listening, the invitation is there. And I'd love to have you on the show and talk to you. So just to fill in the entire picture, right, of Dennis and Hank Ketchum. And I did check out, I mentioned earlier that the interview with Hank Ketchum and Larry King. And it's really kind of interesting because there are a couple of things I picked up on in that interview that I thought maybe I'd like to know more about. And certainly I think The Merchant of Venice is going to reveal that. And I haven't read it yet, so I'm looking forward to reading that autobiography by Hank Ketcham. But one of the things he mentioned was working at Disney in the late 30s, early 40s. And I wondered if he was there during the strike, and he was. And it's interesting the way he describes the Disney studio before the strike and after the strike. He doesn't go into too much detail, just a little blurb, but it is really revealing about the tension that existed at the Disney studios after the strike in 1941. And one of the key points that Hank Ketcham makes is that a time clock was put in, and employees had to punch in after the strike in 1941. And that changes everything, man. That changes everything from being a kind of creative environment that's all about a common purpose and a shared goal. It becomes about employer and employee, and that changes everything. I'm not sure that was the right response to striking employees. And in what I've read, I think it was twofold. It was a heartbreak on the one hand, because I think he thought he was fair, and then on the other hand, I think it was controlling, and the controlling aspect seemed to win out after the strike, and made for a kind of dispirited atmosphere from everything I've read. But others who were there may be able to fill me in on that if there's anybody left from that period of time. So it's an interesting story. And then another very quick aside, Hank Ketcham didn't seem to know who Robert Crumb was. And this was in 1991 or 2, somewhere in there, that Hank was talking. So that was kind of interesting. And they are from two very different worlds, but it's kind of interesting that Charles Schulz knew who Robert Crumb was, and maybe Hank found out later. But two, obviously, we're talking about very different worlds in comics and cartooning, and yet, on the other hand, Crumb is a master of his world, just as Hank was a master of his own. And I've actually, strangely enough, I've had this I go through these periods where I want to check into somebody's work, or I don't know what it's about. But anyway, I wanted to read some Crumb, and I hadn't for a while. So I picked up Fritz the Cat, the collection. I've read Fritz in, dribs and drabs in other collections, but anyway, I finally picked up that complete book and Mr. Natural, and I'm just loving that stuff. It's great and totally different, and I guess maybe I needed a little change of pace, but Crumb certainly offers that. But anyway, that sort of struck me too, and there are a couple of other things in that interview. You should check it out. It's on YouTube. Look up Hank Ketcham, and it's the Larry King interview. There's a whole slew of things that'll come up. One I haven't listened to yet is a speech he gave, I think, at a graduation in 1971. So that's got to be pretty interesting, too. And so there's some interesting, if you're interested in more Ketcham lore and the history of comics and the great cartoonists of the late 20th century or middle 20th century, check into that. The stuff is right there. And there's a Larry King interview with Charles Schulz, too, and I've got to listen to that. I've listened to a bunch of Schulz interviews on YouTube, but that one has escaped me up until now, and I think I will check it out very shortly. And speaking of checking things out, follow me on Instagram, okay? You want to find out what the heck is it that I do? What makes me an authority on comics? Is anyone an authority on anything? I hope Dr. Fauci is an authority. I believe he is. So, anyway, check out my Instagram, okay? Because some of my work gets posted, not all of it, but some of it's there. You might find it entertaining, might be interesting. You don't know. You may find it boring. I don't know, but check it out. It's at Grogan Jeff. G-R-O-G-E. No. I can never spell my own name correctly. It's G-R-O-G-A-N-G-E-O-F-F. M-I-C-K-E-Y-M-O-U-S-E. Okay. So check that out. It's the same number of syllables. I think therein lies the tale. So go to my Patreon page, patreon.com/Jeff Grogan, spelled the same way, G-O-F-F-G-R-O-G-A-N, except in reverse this time. It's not Grogan Jeff, it's Jeff Grogan. So patreon.com/Jeff Grogan. I was about to mix it up again myself. Anyway, I can't keep these things straight. Go to my Patreon page. anything you give will be greatly appreciated. I'm trying to build that up slowly over time so that, when all hell breaks loose, I've got something to fall back on. We have some wonderful cartoonists on the horizon. First up, Jan Elliott of Stone Soup, that terrific comic strip about two sisters raising families just across the fence from one another. And then we have John Rose of the venerable and much loved Barney Google and Snuffy Smith. That's right. John Rose of Snuffy Smith will be here to talk about Barney Google and Billy DeBeck and Snuffy and Louise and, yes, Sparkplug too. So hold on to your hats. That one's coming your way soon. If you love comics and you love cartooning, we have a treasure trove of interesting people arriving on our shores here. Yeah. Okay. Well, so that'll do it for this time. I hope, again, that you are safe and happy and healthy and well. I hope everyone you care about is the same. And until next time, thanks for listening.
Come here this instant.
You blockhead! Why don't we go down and have a bologna sandwich?
Dennis, get in bed.
Okay.